Members, we now turn to the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 2, and the question is that Part 1 stand part. Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Chairman, it's a pleasure to take a call, or who knows, a couple of calls on the Student Loan Amendment Bill number 2 in its committee stage, where we are discussing Part 1 of the bill. Mr Chairman, I wish to reaffirm that the Labour opposition will be supporting the bill at this stage, and I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Select Committee and indeed the Minister in bringing the bill to the House. Mr Speaker, the bill does two relatively straightforward but relatively minor jobs to the student loan scheme. Firstly, it broadens the definition of income so that it includes income from trusts, companies, superannuation schemes and so forth, in calculating eligible student or family income. And secondly, it allows information sharing between Customs and IRD so that IRD can track students who are in serious default of their repayments when they go overseas. Mr Speaker, the bill, however, is notable, not so much for what it does do, but for what it does not do. Mr Speaker, although it does save the Crown approximately $7.5 million over the next 5 years, it ignores a total of $2.67 billion. That's $2.67 thousand million of accumulated student debt. There are no solutions for the student loan debt crisis in this bill, nor are there any solutions for the longer run and just as important issue of the intergenerational unfairness between the generation represented by most but not quite all members of this House, which is the baby boom. I don't personally have the pleasure of being part of that generation because I just squeak into Gen X, I'm happy to say. Thank you, members opposite. I know that there's a certain amount of jealousy there from the backbench of the government benches. I may give Alfred Naro the benefit of the doubt, but I most certainly won't be giving that member from Hamilton too much benefit on that call. Now, it's also somewhat interesting, that's all right, settle down, gentlemen, settle down. It's also pretty interesting, Mr Chairman, that the Minister and the Chair has got this bill to committee stage reading today, being the day that the second of his two tax measures, the cell phone tax, has been torpedoed by the Prime Minister, and following as it does yesterday, where his car park tax was similarly torpedoed. And there is, of course, a common theme between those measures, which the government has now seen reason on, and the measures in this bill. And the common theme is that this is the Minister for small changes. The Minister has made small things happen while ignoring much bigger problems. In the tax area, of course, it's the gaping chasm created by the lack of a capital gains tax, one of only 3 countries in the OECD not to have one. Of course we need one, says the IMF, says the OECD, but we don't have that debate today. Of course we need to have more fairness in the income tax system. Of course we need to fill in major avoidance loopholes. Those are huge jobs. They're just jobs the government isn't tackling. Now, here in the student loan scheme, there are 2 principal strategic issues. The first is that the scheme is costing the taxpayer an arm and a leg, and the debt is mounting. That debt is now in the tune of billions, $2.67 billion according to the latest information, and it's growing. And this bill shaves perhaps over 5 years $7.5 million. That's just over $1 million, not quite $1.5 million a year of cosmetic trimming to the cost of the scheme, but meanwhile does nothing much to address the inherent unfairnesses. I see the member Holly Walker has resumed her seat. She gave a very good speech in the first reading of this bill, where she drew attention to those intergenerational problems and said that this student loan scheme is putting to great risk a generation of students who are working hard, playing by the rules, learning as fast as they can, but starting their working life with a mortgage even though they have no house. And in my first reading speech, sir, I used the example of 2 hypothetical people, old Peter and young Peter, one hypothetically of the age of the current minister and another one of today's students. and compared the situation faced by both of them. And the results, sir, based on some pretty straightforward calculations, for example, at a minimum of $172, a conservative 40 weeks of study year, young Peter would have racked up $34,500 by graduation. Chairman.
Honourable David.
By graduation, that would be $64,500 in debt before he starts trying to graduate, get a house, a mate or feed a family. Mr. Speaker, and that is the burden which today's young people are growing up with. And what we want them to know from the Labour perspective is that we understand their plight and that we are going to work tirelessly, not just through this bill, but through a number of measures that we'll be working on before bringing them to the public before the election. We are going to work on that issue of intergenerational fairness. We think, for example, that a capital gains tax and active housing policy that provides more affordable homes for young New Zealanders is an important complement to measures like the affordability of tertiary education. We certainly don't like the arbitrary 5-year limit on receiving student loans that is essentially making postgraduate study beyond the reach of all but those who were born with the proverbial silver spoon. And it's interesting, isn't it, Mr. Chairman, that in the current government there are 1 or 2 poster children for social mobility. The Prime Minister, it's often said, although that's a carefully crafted narrative, and indeed the Minister for Social Development. But the difference between this side of the House, sir, and that side of the House is that when members on this side see someone climbing the ladder, they want to make sure the ladder is there for the next generation. And the difference between us, sir, and the government is that they've made rather a nasty habit of pulling the ladder up after themselves to save money from their own tax bill and damn the torpedoes of the implications for the next generation. And this bill, sir, while we support it because it does nothing wrong and it takes minor steps towards making the scheme slightly fairer, it is a bill of 2 small things, while the elephant in the room is a scheme that is foundering under the weight of debt and is foundering under a growing and pressing problem of intergenerational unfairness. And it is time, sir, that the Minister responsible for the student loan scheme, the Honourable Peter Dunn, stood up and took responsibility for those major issues, just as he should stand up and take responsibility for the major issues in the revenue portfolio. New Zealand does not need just tinkering. We do not need more of the same. We do not need lipstick on the pig that is the New Zealand economy. What we want, sir, is step change. We want vision, we want strategy, we want go forward, we want jobs for hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders currently without work so that they can get ahead, so that they can make the best of their potential, and in this context, Mike Sabin, that they can pay off their student loans. Because if they don't have a job, they can't pay back their loans. Mr. Speaker, it's well known that we face, it's step change, not small change. Well put, Andrew Little. And unfortunately, we've got the Minister for Small Change, not step change, in the chair. The Minister for Small Change, not step change. And we need step change. Mr. Speaker, it's well known that in the next few weeks, hundreds, possibly thousands of workers in one of New Zealand's largest telecommunications companies, many of them smart young people on good wages, are going to lose their jobs. And the question is, where are the replacement jobs when hundreds of telco workers hit the streets? What about the jobs for the smart new graduates from the business school and the engineering school who would like opportunities like that will not exist? And what about those like young Peter who start work with a mortgage of greater than $60,000 because they are similarly burdened by debt? Well, the member over there talks about aspiration. I have aspiration for my children, Mr. Speaker, and that is that they can get a good tertiary education, that I can help them and they can pay the balance, and that they will get a job when they finish, and they will maximise their potential and thereby their contribution to this country. And Mr. Chairman, when we have small change, not step change, we are leaving a generation out in the cold. They deserve better, Mr. Chairman. They deserve these small changes, but they deserve a whole lot more besides.
Mr. Chair.
Holly Walker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I'd like to thank the previous speaker, the Honourable David Cunliffe, for raising the issue of intergenerational equity.